This podcast is for general information only. It is not intended as a substitute for general healthcare services. If you have medical conditions, you need to see your doctor. Use of this information is at the user's own risk. Welcome to FitRx with Dr. Greg Dennis. Join me as we challenge the standard sick model of healthcare. This is your source for everything health, wellness, prevention, fitness, biohacking, and more. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the FitRx Health and Wellness Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Dennis, and yes, I am back. It has been a minute. Life happens, and it certainly did with me. I kind of took a little hiatus, but I did not want to give this podcast up. And so, if you know anyone who has quit following the podcast, let them know I'm back, and we'll be continuing episodes now and in the future. So appreciate everyone joining me again. And I have a guest today with a very important topic. So my guest is Heidi Moretti. She is a registered dietitian and a functional medicine practitioner with 26 years of clinical experience. And she is an author. She has written several books. And one that we're going to talk about today is called The Cortisol Fix. And it explores how chronic stress, cortisol dysregulation can affect things like energy, sleep, weight, gut health, hormones, mood, you name it. I'm sure if you have listened to me, you've heard me talk a lot about cortisol, and I'm sure that she will talk about how cortisol is not always necessarily a bad thing, but it certainly needs to be regulated. And so, again, just a very important topic, as cortisol can really affect many things. So, Heidi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Dr. Dennis. It's an honor to be here with you today.
I appreciate that. Well, I guess for our listeners, tell more, I guess, just a little bit about you and maybe your motivation in specifically writing this book about cortisol.
Yeah, so yeah, you're right. I've been a functional medicine provider, dietitian for a very long time, and I can tell you it's never been a dull moment. I just find the field so fascinating and ever increasingly growing in terms of like research but also, I feel like part of what I love about my practice is I get to fill in the gaps where maybe there aren't a whole lot of other resources. I've read in-depth like nutrient metabolism research, and it's just, there's lots of little research gems that are hidden away that are, rarely disseminated. And so that's usually a lot of fun for me when I'm talking to clients. And I think part of what brought me to writing Cortisol Fix, I had a client in particular, she told me multiple times that I needed to write about a book about cortisol because I really helped her heal, her stress response through like a nutrition and holistic herbal approach. And then from there, she just kept insisting, you need to write this down, you need to share it with the world. And I did. So that's what brought me to it. And I think it's been a fun journey. Writing the book itself was, it often for myself is not just to, confirm what I love doing the digging on the research, but it's also just, I feel like one way where we can disseminate information outside of, blogging or, it's just another avenue to get information that people don't see or they don't get access to. That's why I did it.
Very nice. Yeah, I really want to write a book one day, but I just don't know when I'm going to find the time in my life to do it. But so kudos to you for doing that.
Well,
So
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Um, so let's talk about maybe cortisol 101.
Uh-huh.
So tell the listeners maybe, what is cortisol? Why do we need to be concerned about it?
So cortisol, it's a hormone, and we have many, many hormones in our body. Cortisol's a message. So it's like it's saying respond, and typically to an external stressor, whether that's, in times gone by, that would have been if we were being chased by a bear or we're being chased or, a flood comes. Yeah, there's a really good reason to have cortisol surging in our body. And what it does in the body there with that signaling or messengers, it tells cells uh, to recruit or like liberate new, resources so that our muscles move fast. It's and our nerves work very quickly, and it's like split second response in the body. And so, yes, it's an amazing thing to keep us alive. Cortisol keeps us here on this planet for a good reason. However, in today's lifestyle, our constant stressors are from, you name it, from our jobs, our families, our social life, or social media, our constant bombardment with stressors that in days gone by, certainly we had stress, but today it's like we're constantly receiving these messages of stress from the cortisol in our body. And yet then it's like our body becomes numb to it. It's like, oh yeah, yeah, we know this message. Yeah, whatever. It's not happening. The bear's not chasing us, So we end up just but we're still recruiting all these nutrients and distributing these and peeing them out for that matter, these nutrients that the cortisol causes. So we lose nutrients, we have inflammation because long-term elevation of cortisol results in an inflammatory response. And when in a short-term response has a anti-inflammatory. So that's in a nutshell, cortisol, why it's good, why it's not so good.
Okay. So what are some signs I get? Well, first let's talk about high cortisol. So you mentioned cortisol kind of being the quote stress hormone that we need in stressful
Mm-hmm.
situations, but for many people, we're just stressed out all the time. Therefore, our cortisol is going to be high too often. So let's talk about that first. You mentioned a few things about just people online and I mean whatever. What are some of the main reasons that people are just going to have kind of chronically high cortisol? And then kind of the follow-up question to that, or what are some of the symptoms that people are going to have if they have just kind of chronically high cortisol?
Yeah, definitely. The reasons, I guess, definitely are, what our lifestyles are like. Sometimes we can't walk away from a task, or jobs. There might be emails late at night. Nowadays we're always connected. There's AI, there's things pulling at us all of the time. Our mental downtime is not adequate to recuperate, outside of the stressors we have in terms of like our external world. There's an internal stress going on too, because let's say, for example, where we are initially like having nutrient reserves to pull from with cortisol, we know that every time we have a in surge of cortisol, whether it's sometimes inappropriate times of the day, we're releasing and peeing out more nutrients than we might have had. And ironically, those nutrients are some of the brakes on cortisol itself. And so, like, say, for example, magnesium and zinc help put the brakes on cortisol, or excessive cortisol. And then when we're stressed, we pee out more of that. And then it's kind of a snowball effect of, loss of nutrients. And then our stress response becomes more inappropriate, so to speak, because we don't have the brakes on the cortisol. So add to that, we've got a food supply that's full of chemicals that cause and impair conversion of cortisol to cortisone. So say, for example, we're exposed to microplastics, which research is showing, at least in animal models, that inhibits the ability to take cortisol and make cortisone. Cortisone is like, it's like you get the text message, and then, so you receive the message, corrected it, and cortisone's like saying to the body, okay, all is good. Cortisone, I think, is, if I remember correctly, what they're injecting into knees and things like that for, as far as inflammation. So that's where that step is missing a lot of the times, is that the toxin exposure we have, chemicals, glyphosate, things that are in our food supply, are creating gut disruption, which then leads to a whole range of, issues in the body in and of itself. Mm-hmm. And so what I'm seeing in my current practice is a ton of food sensitivities, which then further drives the inflammatory response and cortisol issues, because food sensitivities, or what I like to consider more like a food reactivity, is telling the body you're under stress all the time anyway, because our immune system is thinking our food is foreign, it's our and then it causes inflammation in the body. Tissues can be damaged as a result, and it's just a whole hot mess. And so that's been one of the things where I feel like has been the biggest change in my clients too, is when we address their food reactivities, that they feel better, including myself, frankly. I just wish I would have had this tool earlier on in my career, but I guess from here on out, I'm helping clients with that. And that's been such a game changer for me and my clients.
So what, like if people are listening to this driving down the road, what are some symptoms that you would say might indicate that somebody just has kind of chronically high cortisol levels? I mean, you kind of mentioned some of them, but I mean, I'm guessing probably fatigue. There are probably some food sensitivities, probably weight gain, probably not sleeping well. I mean, I'm sure there's a whole list of them, but what are maybe some others that may indicate that people have a cortisol maybe regulation issue?
Yeah. Well, what I noticed specifically, especially, I'll meet a client first time. I'm doing telehealth almost exclusively. So I'll look at I see them from here up,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm looking at their face, and there's definitely a clear look of like swelling, or, that's actually kind of a classical symptom of excess cortisol too. Like, say, for example, if you think about someone who's had a kidney transplant, or someone who's on anti-rejection medication, they're like steroid based or cortisol based, and they get the moon face or the swollen in their face swelling. And so that's one of the things I can see in my clients, is excess signs of stress and cortisol. Definitely sleep, just general anxiousness about life. When I see a client come face to face with me and they just look like they have the burden of the world on them, it's a mentality that they, are, you can just, it's palpable, the stress, they're how they're navigating everything in their day is fear-based, or like, because at the root cause of stress is fear, and cortisol. We're afraid of maybe not pleasing our boss. We're afraid of not like meeting our family's needs, or, whatever it might be. That it's like a palpable feeling I get from them, the stress in their life, that they're burdened. Outside of that, over time, physical body starts to decline in its function, the fatigue, the belly weight gain. It disrupts other hormones. It's, having high cortisol a lot of the time will end up resulting in imbalanced estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, those things, insulin resistance. Think about, it's interesting, I was looking at statistics of, what is the major cause of heart disease, and which we all worry about today. I mean, because it's still the number one killer of people. If you look at like cholesterol and, its magnitude of risk, it's, and then you look at stress, work stress specifically increases the risk of cardiovascular disease or a heart attack by over 100-fold what cholesterol does, at least if, you can't really compare apples to apples, but that's at least what the data is showing in the epidemiological studies is that, we're really not treating the elephant in the room. We're treating something that you can put a pill at, so
Mhm.
it's like, it's where, so I think, anyone who's got chronic disease, you can assume they probably have a fair bit of cortisol imbalance too. But
Mhm.
at that point, it gets a little bit like now you're in sort of a um, kind of an emergency mode in that regard, right? So it's like, I'm sure you see that as well,
Yeah.
or you're,
Yeah, it's I see every day, and you've kind of mentioned it about how things kind of snowball,
mm-hmm,
and they all of these things are kind of interrelated, and so you're stressed and you have high cortisol, which is causing weight gain, which then causes insulin resistance, and then now your hormones are low, and that's just further exacerbating your metabolic disease, and then and it just all kind of snowballs downward when you start having these things. And so what I tell patients, the good news is you start changing some of these things in the right way, well, then it snowballs the other way, and you start,
mm-hmm,
you improve metabolic health, and you improve hormones, and you improve sleep, and so it all kind of goes the other way, and it is
mm-hmm,
reversible. So kind of on that note, so what do you talk about in the book? I mean, well, the name of it is Cortisol Fix. So I guess people want to know, and we'll talk about maybe low cortisol here in a minute, but most
mm-hmm.
people are probably suffering more from kind of the chronic stress and, more higher cortisol. And so, what is the fix? And I know there's not just one simple fix, but specifically, everybody's stressed, whether you're a young mom who, is taking your kids to soccer practice in school and, just running around and doing all this, or, I mean, there's all kinds of stress it's, so it's hard to say, well, just quit stressing, but
Right.
how do we fix this if we're all so chronically stressed, and so I mean, I know we need to fix sleep, we need to fix all these things, but specifically, what do you address in the book on kind of where to start as far as fixing cortisol, specifically high cortisol?
Yeah, and I guess the cool part, at least from what I've noticed in my own clinical experience, is that the mechanism behind nutrient loss, which is, cortisol can cause you to lose magnesium and thiamine and riboflavin and vitamin B6 and zinc and, selenium. And the good news is like a really good micronutrient. Like we're not talking like some um, store brand or like major brand that you find at Walmart and Costco. Not to say anything wrong with those, but it's just that you need like a naturally formed vitamin that can at least replace what's lost. And a lot of times within a week, I notice that clients will at least have some vigor in them. They might have a smile back. They might have a little bit more energy, a little more positive outlook. Magnesium is usually a little slower to respond. So people, I hate to admit it, even myself, I took probably a month of really saying and admitting that, okay, I really can't get enough magnesium in my diet. I need to be doing this daily, taking magnesium. That usually around a month of taking it, that you'll notice you're handling the stress better. And I think that's key is like we can't get rid of all stress. We can try to at least manage our days better, but there's no way all of it's going to all disappear overnight. Like we're still going to get texts, we're still going to get emails, we're still going to be dealing with life. And so that's one of the earlier things I do. The other things that would be important to address is, just looking at core things that are hard, like in a busy life to get. And protein is one of those things, because what happens when people hit the drive-through, or, they're grabbing, I don't know, pre-prepared meals or hitting restaurants, is that those places that are selling those foods try to turn a profit, right? So they're not going to serve you high protein foods. They're going to serve you the cheaper carb foods, and you're not, so like really just like simple having people focus on eating enough protein. And sometimes that's enough to kind of like the vitamins and getting protein is enough to really get them back into a better rhythm. But also just find that herbal remedies can be very helpful as well. Lots of science there. It's not well talked about, but there's a whole host of, hundreds upon thousands of research studies about various herbs that can help put the brakes on excess cortisol. So, say, for example, one being lavender. And there was actually a head-to-head clinical trial showing that it was equal to the effects of Xanax, but of course not the side effects and addiction of Xanax. And they use the form of lavender called Selexin, 80 milligrams a day. So that's simple, low risk, low hanging fruit things to try. Having said that, though, like, is lavender for everyone? No. Herbs have a characteristic about them. They have, beyond their effects on cortisol, they're these plants with complex makeup. They've got hundreds of compounds in them. So sometimes lavender might be the right thing in the moment. In another moment, it might be, for another person, medicinal mushrooms like lion's mane mushrooms. And for another person, we might go with rhodiola if they need more energy, if they're fatigued. If you have someone who's just, not into anything outside or out there, so to speak, it's not really out there, but like to the world, it seems out there. Like just a cup of chamomile tea. I mean, chamomile is pretty good medicine in a cup, iced if you're in Oklahoma right now, right? So,
For sure.
but some simple things that don't cost a lot of money can really, and the way they work, those herbs are fascinating. There's a lot of duplication in nature and subtle differences. So, say, for example, chamomile has a lot of overlap with mints, which has a lot of overlap with lavender in terms of its chemical makeup. So, and I think that the reason it's that way across the globe is that we were meant to have these tools. In my book, I talk about how I feel like people have herbal deficiencies. Our bodies were designed, and in the plant over the planet, there's all these edible herbs, and now we eat, fast food burgers with no herbs, or and that's just one example, but it's a forgotten art and science that I'm really passionate about and use myself. For example, one I really won't be without is ginkgo biloba, and it's one that really works in my body. I find it keeps me mentally sharp. It's great for hormones. It's great for like circulation. And I think the problem people haven't adopted it is because when they talk about the dosing, like the devil's in the dosing, some people don't take enough. It's like, well, and especially the clinical studies showed it didn't improve cognitive performance or mental performance are the ones where they gave low doses versus the higher doses are. So I think that's where it's fun too, because you get to really, and the book writing itself, I get into the details and why certain things work and why they don't, and where the studies why they failed. And so it's and why the ones that succeeded did is because a lot of times they weren't doing the right dose. So anyway, it's fun. It's fun for me anyway.
Yeah.
So.
Okay. Well, let me change gears for a minute and
Mhm.
talk about maybe low cholesterol. Excuse
Mhm.
me, not cholesterol, cortisol, low
Uh-huh.
cortisol. So in the medical field, there's kind of controversy about that as far as, the diagnosis of adrenal fatigue and is that a real diagnosis? Is it a real thing? Um, and so what is your take on that? Can somebody get adrenal fatigue, which would basically be where their body just kind of quits producing cortisol? And if so, what are the symptoms of that?
Yeah, I think that's still somewhat debatable. It's one of those things where, but debatable or not, or whether or not it's real in the sense that conventional medicine thinks it's real or not, that it's the symptoms are real of that chronic, like it becomes just like they're drained and don't have any motivation, don't have any energy. Is it cortisol? Maybe. I mean, do we check it? Yeah. Interestingly, when I did my hormone panel a number of years ago, I almost had no cortisol at all, like at all. And I couldn't make sense of it, but I also didn't have a whole lot of any other hormones either. So it was maybe what you consider cortisol fatigue, but I just didn't, since then I had definitely adopted a different regimen in my life. And I mean, I don't feel symptomatic. So in essence, I do believe it's real. What to do about it is a little different, but I feel like it's kind of you're one and the same thing because you've kind of taxed the system. The adrenal glands are right on top of the kidney, right? And
Mhm.
they're tiny little organs that do a powerhouse of stuff. And like if we're constantly squeezing out cortisol all the time, do we run out of resources? Yeah, very conceivably, yes. So especially nutrients that help the the adrenals recover quickly, like say vitamin C being one of those that really helps the adrenals function, right? So whether or not it's a real thing or not, I think still the management, at least, I don't know, in terms of if you have a different take on it, is the same: nourishing the body, taking time to take care of yourself. Maybe it's time for a massage. Maybe it's the body just saying, okay, yeah, you need to take care of yourself. We're going to make you take care of yourself by making you like couch bound, basically. The body tells us things it needs. And so I think,
Yeah.
people do get to that point. Yeah.
So, do you recommend people checking their cortisol levels? My take on this is, and I don't do it a lot, but I don't feel like we get a lot of information from one single lab value,
Mhm.
and so that's if we really want a true idea of what the cortisol is doing, we need to get multiple levels throughout the day. I typically do serum levels, but that is one that if I'm going to check that, I do like the saliva just because it's, easier to do at home if we're going to be checking that. So what is your take on just getting, cortisol levels?
I mean, I think it can be useful. Is it necessary? I don't know that it is, because at the end of the day, they present pretty similarly, and the remedy is also pretty similar. De-stress, nourish the body, and I had a provider. I was her dietitian for a while. She says, Heidi, if we checked everybody, or we'd have to check everyone because everybody's overstressed. And you know what we're going to find is everybody's high cortisol. And I said, yeah, valid. That's valid too. But I think whether we check it or not, I think, looking at people and really seeing if they have that excess stress. Are they not sleeping well? Are they gaining weight in their belly? Are they getting the moon face? Those things are telltale signs that stress is a big burden for people. But yeah, and then yeah, so I'm on the fence. I think information's always good, and I agree. I use the Dutch test as well. It's the 4 tests through the day, and it's because yeah, you might be fine one part in the day, but it's only as good as it's what it's measuring, and it's in the moment, right? So it's could be different on a different day. You could have tested on a day where you had low stress, or you could have tested on a day where you had high stress. Um, so I think it's information, but it's not foolproof by any stretch. What are your thoughts about it? Kind of the same, it sounds like.
So I don't check it very often. Um,
Mhm.
and kind of like what you're saying, I think a lot of times you kind of know what's going on based on the symptoms, and because it's so hard to check the multiple levels throughout the day, I just don't check it routinely. There are rare circumstances that I do, and I just feel like it's worthwhile, even if I'm suspicious for maybe adrenal fatigue or something like that. But I don't do it routinely. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because I know it. Yeah, I can kind of guess what you're going to find. So,
right.
yeah.
Um, so if somebody is listening and they're exhausted all the time, trouble sleeping, they're gaining weight around the middle, don't feel like themselves, um, where's a good place for them to start?
6 months ago, I might have given you a different answer, but today I would definitely say food sensitivity testing through MRT. While there isn't, like 10 clinical studies showing that it works for this purpose, I've just seen client after client come around, like in terms of like their energy, their fatigue, their stress. Their sleep, because like that low grade inflammation from our food is sabotaging so much in our body. And then when you dampen the inflammation, you heal the gut by eating the foods that work for you. Then you're able to not only get the nourishment from the food, you're able to then improve cellular signaling. And because when you're inflamed, all the cortisol messages in the world aren't going to work right, so the body can keep trying to spin out cortisol to give a message, and it's basically like insulin resistance. It's cortisol resistance. And I think when we absorb our nutrients better, we're not eating the foods causing inflammation. And I think this brings up a good time to mention that like typical anti-inflammatory diets are very misguided at best and are only looking at population averages. So say, for example, if I were to follow an anti-inflammatory diet, I would have a ton of inflammation because on my personal food reactivities, I react to a lot of fish. I react to olive oil. I react to some of the most commonly purported anti-inflammatory foods cause my body inflammation. So I think when we assume one food's right for one person, it's absolutely not. My husband's is entirely different set of foods he reacts to. And I think, so it's important to acknowledge that, in any given body, food can be your best medicine or your worst enemy, so I think that's, at least in my recent, it's just been such a powerful tool. I had a client yesterday, and I can't tell any details other than just gaining weight, fatigue. She has a cluster of autoimmune stuff, including POTS syndrome, and she just was glowing. I saw her yesterday, and it's just like, thank you so much. I can go to the gym now. I can, exercise. I can, like, her face had slimmed down and she's losing weight. It's just, I think it's all because her food is now the right food for her. So it's just, and that, I mean, we did some other things, don't get me wrong, but that was the big things that
Sure.
made the difference in her turning around her health and her stress and her sleep and her.
So sometimes when I, am doing a lecture on something and I'm researching a particular topic, I'll always maybe kind of learn something in that research. What is, was there something that surprised you that you learned while you were writing this book?
Something that surprised me. Um, yeah, I mean, there was a lot of surprises. I think when you get into, looking at how much nutrients are in control of everything, as far as, um, for example, how much magnesium plays a role in dampening down the stress response in the body or just putting the brakes on inappropriate stress. And I think I was writing this book probably about the time I was really doubling down on getting my magnesium. I can't in a more consistent way in my life. It was probably kind of coincided with when I started to really double down on it. And then, so lots of surprises in that regard. And the other surprise is that really there is no nutrient that isn't involved in cortisol response because, and it makes sense, our body is like, needs a little bit of everything for all tissues to work right. And it's just like our our cells need the machinery to keep the checks and balances. And but yeah, that to me, like the micronutrient part was very fascinating to just learn. Wow, we really can't be low in anything
Hmm.
and function right. It's just not. And in that regard, everyone, it stands to reason, needs supplementation in the right forms, not just willy-nilly standard vitamins. It's got to be good stuff. So I think that's what, it really, that was the take home message. Absolutely. Everybody needs to really find a good supplement and work with somebody that can guide that, because there's people that overdo it too. There is that. It's very possible to overdo things. I've had people come to me with 15 different vitamins that had triple doses of what they should have been taking on certain things and not enough on other things, so there's definitely things that people do that are a little misguided too, in the excessive range too, for sure. But
Well, very good. So the book is Cortisol Fix by Heidi Moretti. I know you can find it on Amazon because I've looked at it on there. Um, what is the best way for people to get a hold of you or just kind of find out more about you?
yeah, you can find out about me at thehealthyrd.com. That's my website. I'm also, I have a startup company called Align Wellness. That's alignwellness.ai. And you can find me on both places. And I'm on social media, Twitter, Facebook. I never get on to TikTok or much on Instagram. Once in a blue moon, my daughter will have a picture right here and I'll look at it.
Well, very good. Well, as we wrap up here, I always ask my guest if they could give us one health tip that would make us healthier today. What would you say to that?
I'd say look for a provider that will do an MRT test. That's a food reactivity test. I highly recommend it. It's been transformational for each and every client that's done it. And I have not had a client that regretted doing it. But working with somebody who's trained in it, certified in that test, and is always very helpful too. So because it's not just a piece of paper, it's a protocol, 11-day protocol. Anybody can follow a specific food plan for 11 days, and it's doable. It's not as intimidating as most people think. So that's the ticket. It's a healing protocol so that people can heal and get well.
Okay. All right.
So
Well, very good. Anything else that you want to say or throw out there before we wrap up here?
really just do appreciate your time.
Yeah,
And
I appreciate you coming on, and I appreciate everyone listening. And obviously, we just kind of barely got into the book. And so, if you're interested in learning more about cortisol, then I'd encourage you to check the book out, The Cortisol Fix, as it is definitely an important subject, important hormone, because people have probably heard me say this. I know I say it in my clinic all the time, because if your cortisol's off, it's hard to get everything else right. As we're talking about sex hormones and everything else, it's all related. So, we got to kind of work on all of it. So, Heidi, really appreciate your time and expertise on this, and appreciate everyone listening. And it's good to be back, and looking forward to some podcast episodes here in the near future. So we will talk to everyone next time. Thank you for listening to FitRx. I invite you to share this with friends and family. If you would like to contact me, you can visit our website at fitrxwellnessok.com, or you can email me at drgreg@fitrxwellnessok.com.